A Note on the Wonderblock, published by Freud in 1925, presented by Ralph Weber. At the beginning of the Wonderblock, Freud asks himself how security in memory can be established. First of all, his answer is by externalizing information. Something is written down and can then be read. This note is a materialized memory apparatus. If I try to improve my memory, there are two options available to me. I can make a note on a piece of paper, but then I have to realize that the space of the paper is finite and exhausted. So I have a permanent but limited memory trial. It can also be that I no longer want to remember the content, or that this procedure seems worthless to me, because I no longer need the permanent track and it can still be found on the sheet of paper. The second way lacks the disadvantages of the first. I can wipe away the trace on a board whenever I want, and it is possible to find new space for words again and again. However, it turns out to be disadvantageous that I cannot obtain a permanent track in this process. I can do this, but if I left all the words on the board as with a sheet of paper, there would be no more room for new entries, and I would run into the problem that I already had with the paper, namely to have no space for new words. Freud writes, "Unlimited receptivity and the preservation of permanent traces seem to be mutually exclusive for the devices with which we substitute our memory. Either the receiving surface must be renewed or the recording must be destroyed." The practices that are supposed to ensure the backup of data, for instance writing on a sheet of paper or the blackboard, are therefore inadequate. In contrast, the mental apparatus appears to be receptive to an unlimited extent and can store memories permanently. Two systems now guarantee these functions. On the one hand, the perceptual consciousness, which picks up on the surface but does not store it, and the memory system, which creates permanent traces. Let us take a closer look at Freud's analogical starting point. The human memory apparatus behaves like a sheet of paper or a blackboard that can be written on. At the origin of this thought, there are two surfaces. For example, two two-dimensional objects that are limited in their extent. The problem is revealed at the edges. If the sheet of paper is full, I will continue to write on a new page. When the board is full, the characters are wiped away, making space for new characters. The problem is inherent in both media, only the solution is handled differently. The problem of conservation arises at the boundaries of space. The sheet of paper calls for an expansion of space. Although the board can be folded out, it reaches the limits of space, which it bends over and erases the signs. Freud now finds a solution to this problem in the wonderblock. The wonderblock essentially consists of two components, a wax compound and a sheet. This adheres to the wax mass and consists of two layers. The upper one is a transparent cellulite plate, the lower one a transparent wax paper. You don't need a pen or check because in this writing process there is no release or absorption of material such as ink or chalk. The writing is created by a kind of scratches, which the writing produces as indentations in the material. The wonderblock does not scratch the material directly. The writing is produced as follows. The pen, or a sharp object, scratches the surface of the sheet so that its lower surface, for example the wax paper, is pressed against the wax mass. These furrows are now visible on the surface of the cover sheet as writing in the cellulite. The visible writing is erased by lifting the cover sheet from the wax tablet so that the wax paper and wax tablet are no longer in contact. The wonder pad is now ready to write again. The wax paper is now lifted from the wax tablet. The writing is now also visible on the wax paper, so that the question of what I actually need the cellulite for is justified. However, the answer comes quickly. The wax paper is too fragile. It needs the protection and stabilization that cellulite gives it. However, the permanent trace of what is written remains in the wax tablet and can also be made visible with appropriate exposure. The transfer to the mental apparatus takes place as follows. The cellulite is the external protection against stimuli, which reduces the intensity of the stimulus. The paper, the stimulus-absorbing surface, which Freud calls perceptual consciousness, System Wahrnehmungsbewusstsein. The material of perception is not passed on to memory, but is written into it. The above problems seem to be solved by the analogy. Freud writes, the wonder block solved the problem of combining the two surfaces by dividing them into two separate, interconnected components systems. After all, it doesn't seem too daring to me to use the cellulite and wax paper cover sheet with the System Wahrnehmungsbewusstsein and its protection against irritation, to equate the wax tablet with the unconscious behind it, the becoming visible of the writing and its disappearance with the illumination and fading of the consciousness during perception. Starting from two instrument analogies, sheet of paper, blackboard, which have reached their spatial limits, Freud finds a solution in another instrument analogy. The wonder block follows a kind of division of labor between the systems. While one system only records and this recording is protected, the other system is responsible for storage. But Freud does not end his reflections here. He takes the analogy further. The disappearance of the writing when the wax paper is removed from the wax tablet reminds him of another way in which the mental apparatus works. He assumes that internal cathexis innovations hit the Wahrnehmungsbewusstsein system in periodic spurts and are taken back again. When these innovations take over the Wahrnehmungsbewusstsein system, consciousness arises. When the innovations are withdrawn, it disappears. Freud writes, it would be as if the unconscious would, by means of the Wahrnehmungsbewusstseinssystem, stretch out feelers toward the outside world, which are quickly withdrawn after the excitations have tasted themselves. If you think that while one hand describes the surface of the wonderblock, another periodically lifts the cover sheet from the wax tablet, that would be a sensualization of the way I wanted to imagine the function of our psychic perception apparatus. So the note on the wonderblock ends with a movement image that illustrates the mental perception apparatus. External stimuli that correspond to the writing hand hit the perceptual consciousness. In the deeper layers, independent of consciousness, contact is periodically established between the perceptual consciousness and the unconsciousness store and given up again. Consciousness is a moment of touch. The consciousness is therefore exposed to two powers: the outside world, which is mediated by the senses, and the unconscious, which periodically generates consciousness through contact with the Wahrnehmungsbewusstseinssystem. Thank you for listening.